I'm ready. Okay, here we go. Mario Acevedo, welcome back to the Rocky Mountain Writer Podcast.
Sure thing. How are you?
Good. You don't sound very excited.
I am very excited. Thank you very much. I appreciate your, your willingness to help the other authors.
Yeah.
I think you're probably the most active promoter of the rest of us in this community. And the fact that you've moved away from the Denver metro area has not stopped you or slowed you down.
No, it won't stop me. Nothing stops me. Nothing stops me from recognizing, and I know you recognize this, and I think you actually taught me this, the quality of the work coming out of Rocky Mountain fiction writers is, some ways just unheralded, unrecognized. There are some just top-notch folks who've come out of RMFW, are still part of RMFW, and it's just a wonderful community, regardless of the quality of fiction that comes out of it. It's a wonderful community, but in fact, there are outstanding books and writing that's being produced.
Well, thank you. I'm glad to be part of that, and and so are you. I think the community of writers, though, is a little broader than RMFW. There's the writers that I know from Lighthouse, and then the writers from Regis, and there's definitely an overlap.
Yep.
And I think that overlap is actually growing more and more. The commercial fiction, I think had a hard time getting traction at Lighthouse, and now it's definitely going. And then Regis and their Mile High program has always been very supportive of commercial fiction, or what they like to call speculative fiction, but I call it commercial fiction.
So
what is great writers?
What is commercial fiction?
Well, obviously anything that sells.
Yeah.
But yeah, where is that line? No one really knows. I like to joke that sometimes that a commercial fiction writer will often go unheralded until he's been dead for about 50 years. Yeah. And then all of a sudden they will recognize, the literary market will recognize him and kind of try to embrace him as their own. I think Raymond Chandler is one such author.
Yep. Well, Mario, we got you on today because we have a fabulous new novel talking about quality. And I don't always get the chance to read. Unfortunately, I wish I had time to read all the works being produced by the guests we have on the podcast. In this case, I got an advanced copy of Luther, Wyoming, I think almost well over a year ago. When the pandemic hit, then the production was delayed. Well, you'll tell us the story about how that all worked, but this is a terrific Western noir, Luther, Wyoming. I was just absolutely blown away. Here's the copy of my advance. Yeah, it was very, very cool. All the galleys really nice. I printed it out. I had to print it out. It was such an engaging story, and it just rocketed from the beginning to the end, and I was absolutely riveted. So congratulations, delayed congratulations on the publication of this novel, along with a co-author. So tell us about the collaboration, tell us about your co-author, and then we'll get to the story.
Okay. Thank you for those kind words, Mark. Well, I do a lot of freelance writing, ghostwriting for Mark Graham Communications.
As do I.
And he has since sold the business to a man by the name of Christopher Frost, who has done a really remarkable job stepping in as Mark Graham has kind of stepped back. So years ago, one of the projects that came to us was this individual by the name of Tomas Alamilla. And he is a Mexican entrepreneur, a restaurateur. He actually owns a restaurant, I think one of several, in Greeley, Colorado. And we were just talking about him. He's kind of this phantom author in that he travels quite a bit between the US and Mexico. He's got family in Mexico. He's not a particularly tech savvy guy. So anyway, he brought in this very, I'm going to say, rough manuscript, and that he wanted to flesh out into a Western, because he loves Westerns. Mexicans love, the whole cowboys and that whole Western mythos, horses and guns. They love that stuff. So he wanted a Western novel, and I think it was about a 40-page manuscript that he had typewritten. And that kind of was the flesh, the bones of the first draft of the story. Originally, it was going to be really more of a novella, and it was about 40,000 words, and we got to that part of it, and I loved the story. I fell in love with it. And usually when you ghostwrite a story, you're writing it for a client, and then you finish it, and then they run off with it. But this one I loved so much, and when we got to the end of the contract, I told Tomas, look, I want to keep writing on this work, keep working on this book with you. So instead of being the ghostwriter, then at that point I became co-author for the book. I just have to say that he is he owns the copyright to the book, so it is his. I'm the co-author. So I fleshed it out. There was a lot that I added to the story. There, the female Tess Buchanan, we added her to the story. And I love the story so much that I actually said, I want to get this published, right, by a publisher. So getting your own work published is a monumental task most of the time, unless your name is Stephen King or J.K. Rowling, and they'll print your grocery list. But for the rest of us, just to get that published, much less else's work, and try to get that published. And then on top of that, it's a Western. And Westerns are very, very narrow niche. But still, being kind of stubborn guy that I am, I persevered. It took a lot longer to get this book published or really accepted by a publisher than it took to get the book to actually write the book. The first publisher that I approached was a publisher of Westerns out of England, of all places. And they passed on it, and you're always disappointed. But looking back on it, I think they had a reason to pass on it. I think the story was somewhat thin, and so I went back and looked at it, and I fleshed it out. And then I approached Five Star Press, who I met Tiffany Schofield at a Rocky Mountain Fiction Writers. She was giving a little presentation about the kind of works they're looking for, and at that time, Five Star Press was actually paring down their offerings, but one of the ones they were not paring down, in fact, they were actually expanding, was Westerns.
Right.
So I said, okay, okay, I got that. However, their guidelines had increased the word count of what I had. So I had to bump up the word count, and it was about 50,000 words.
50, 50?
It was 50,000 words.
Wow.
Which is kind of small, but I mean, that was, and actually most traditional Westerns are either huge books like Lonesome Dove,
right,
or they tend to be very quick reads like Louis L'Amour's books.
Right. So you had to add 10,000 words, is what you're saying. 10.
Right. Yeah,
okay,
I had to add about 10,000 words to it, and again, that actually helped the book because there were whole scenes that I kind of maybe cheated the reader in that I just kind of glossed over them.
Mm-hmm.
And probably in the book, if you read it, that one part that at first was very thin was the trial at the end. That one I fleshed out. And then the scene when they go to San Francisco was something that I added to it, which I actually love because if you read a Western, nobody ever goes to San Francisco and the Barbary Coast and the kind of, things that are going on there. And then I had to flesh out the love interest, Tess Buchanan, and her backstory and her father, which I added quite a bit to the story. At first, there wasn't that. Some of the changes that I had from the original manuscript in that Nelson Cook and Adam Sanchez, Nelson Cook originally was a protagonist in the story. And I decided to flip them around because I thought that the other character, Adam Sanchez, was a little bit more unusual for a Western. For a couple of reasons. I think one of them was the fact that, writing the book, I like Westerns, but unfortunately, a lot of the Western mythology is I hate to use the word whitewash, but it has been, it's been very bland. If you start to read the history of the West, it is a lot more, again, I don't want to use the word diverse, but I'm going to use that word because it was.
Sure.
there was a lot more going on. There was a lot more texture. There was a lot more nuance to the history. So I wanted to add a lot of that into the book, not for the sake of that, but actually to make it more reflective of what was actually going on in the West. And I hopefully that kind of showed in the story.
Absolutely. It does. And so that's fantastic background. Now, just if you could just walk us through the story, and how did you settle on Luther, Wyoming? How did you, why Wyoming?
Okay, again, the original manuscript was set in Montana. And there wasn't a lot going on in Montana in those days. And it actually made it very difficult because it was so rural. I mean, it wasn't that it was not possible, but I thought by moving it further south into Wyoming, there was things going on in Rawlins, and then in Cheyenne, and of course the proximity into Boulder. The railroad hadn't been built yet out there to the to that part of Wyoming. So I mean, so it's still very much that rural West, but it is still not so remote that I couldn't work the kind of story that I thought you had to have.
Well, and you had to at least had to have the beginning of a law enforcement organization to make this work.
Yes, that part of it, and of course the bandits moving in. I don't know. In that time, there was I don't know what bandits would do in Montana in those days, other than fight bears or something. I don't know. So that was part of it. When I got this assignment to the book, it was kind of curiously, I was also got very interested in the West as well, reading about it, and kind of really turned my head around thinking about the West. And the one book that did that was Empire of the Summer Moon by S.G. Gwynn, about the Comanches. And I just fell in love with that book. And like, again, that book I realized how much I felt cheated by the I guess the common wisdom of the West that was given to us through popular culture.
Right.
There was a lot more.
Right.
So that made me appreciate it. I have a hard time watching Western movies because they're so darn cliche,
cheesy.
Yeah, they say kind of cheesy and darn cliche, and find one and but a lot of but some of the books, for example, The Shootist that John Wayne made a movie of, the book had a lot of very interesting details in it that I actually sort of tied into. It helped me in my writing. I read most of the big Westerns, like A True Grit. I like that. One of the things I liked about True Grit was the language. And that's one of the things that I try to do in my book, in the conversations, is to make the conversation more period accurate as far as I could. Another book I liked was Daniel Rodrell's book, Woe to Live On, about the Civil War in the Kansas-Missouri border. I also read, and of course, Blood Meridian and
Cormac McCarthy.
Lonesome Dove were some of the books. And then, of course, a lot of Louis L'Amour books as well.
Yeah. And there's nothing wrong with little Louis L'Amour, even though he came into it as he just sort of stumbled across Westerns as his thing after trying so many other things. But boy, his stories, some of his novels are just textbook lessons in start the action and go. And
right, and he was a very, very good writer.
Yeah,
I mean, in terms of being able to set the scene and choose those, very lyrical when he wanted to be, and just kind of place you there. And some of his phrasings, I really wanted to steal, but of course, you don't want to do that.
Yeah. Wow. So you really invested. This started off as a freelance gig for you, as a sort of a job, and you saw the possibilities, and then it sounds like you invested a lot of your own effort and time to make this what it is, a final beautiful compelling book that you just somehow you just had to, it was a story that just was so compelling to you, you had to put yourself hard and deep into it.
I think I did do that. As a writer, particularly as a writer of fiction, there are certain kinds of books I wanted to write. and I've always wanted to write a Western, but honestly, I could never think of an original story. And then this story with Tomas came into me. There's that, I don't want to give away too much, but if you remember that one double cross when the girl comes riding into town, I remember when I first read that, I'm like, all right, this is awesome. And that was totally Tomas's idea, where everything in the story is sort of kind of locked together and nobody knows what to do. And she comes riding in and all of a sudden, boom, everything just falls apart and things go off the cliff after that. So I thought, the big plot twists in the story were Tomas's. So I have to hand it to him for having that imagination of thinking it through. As a ghostwriter, there's some other stories. I've always wanted to write World War II stories, and I could never think of an original idea for myself. And then I've had clients come in and come up with some really cool stories. I think also, like a lot of writers, I am what they call a research slut, and I'll go down that hole.
Yeah.
And then it gets to the point of you have to learn, how you want to make the story sound authentic, but you don't want it to read like a textbook of whatever subject you're getting caught up on. One of the challenges for me is I don't know much about horses, so having to write a Western and not know a lot about horses. But nobody's called me out on it. Nobody, has said, so I don't know a lot about cars, and I drive them all the time. So I guess maybe it's. But one of the things that I learned is, and I kind of put it into the story that they never talk about in the movies, is what happens to the horse when you're not riding it, right? I mean, the guys ride and they tie the horse up to the saloon, and then they have a gunfight in the saloon. They jump on the horses and they go. Or once in a while they might spend the night in the in the saloon hotel, but nobody talk what happens to the horse, right? So I learned, and I actually talk a little bit about the stable. They have to put the horse in the stables, and you pay somebody to take care of that. And those are a little bit logistics. I don't just enough to let people know that hopefully I know what I'm talking about when I'm writing about it.
Right. Well, there are a couple of things there. One is that in some ways it's you could sort of look at the plot and say there's a lot of traditional elements here,
right?
But there's something different about it. It feels like you did inject some noir into it, a noirish kind of flavor. And then there's the double twist, but then there are some other twists, and boy, you just don't see them coming. And you don't, your loyalties kind of change as the plot moves on, which is always fun.
Yeah, I think Manuel Ramos I asked him for a blurb, and his blurb was, you got the bad guys are the bad guys, and the good guys not so much. Right? So even Tess Buchanan has got her little dark, which actually propelled the story forward. Writing a Western, and it's interesting, a Western it's got certain tropes that you must have.
Yeah.
Because if you don't have those tropes, then you're actually writing a Western historical, which is a little different. And in Western, it's the audience expectations that if you don't have them, they'll feel cheated because they're not getting the kind of story that they want. All right. So, of course, you got the horses and, the kind of cowboy stuff and saloons, and of course, a lot of gunplay and tough, really bad guys and gangs. The element you talked about in noir, if you go back and you read a lot of the period literature, or not even literature, it was like the gazettes and things like that, like the police gazettes. People loved those kinds of stories back then. They were very popular, and they were actually kind of allowed them to be kind of shady, and have the public read kind of very purient sort of stories.
Yeah.
But in those stories, definitely very noir. If you ever read about them, we would recognize them right away.
Right.
There's a lot of love triangles, a lot of treachery, a lot of double crosses, a lot of criminals and law enforcement bending the law for the greater good. So I felt that using those elements in this story, I liked. I think that even good guys in any story are complicated, and I like to have that.
Yeah. Were you bringing Tomas along as you wrote drafts and sharing these various iterations as the story progressed?
Yeah, I would I would show him. There was a point in the story where the story had advanced beyond his original manuscript. So a lot of that story development was on me.
Yeah.
Okay, so it
But
was just a matter of him getting to buy in.
Yeah, he was happy with what you were doing.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, yes. He never complained, so I guess he
Yeah.
was. The title Luther, Wyoming. I don't know. I kind of forget where the title Luther had to do with something like a forbidden place.
Mhm.
And then when I latched onto the name of Luther, Wyoming, I think there was a Netflix series about Luther, and it's somewhere, I think, in the Scandinavian area. And then there was another Luther, I think, in New Zealand or Australia. And I said, well, I'm going to keep with Luther because by the time this book comes out, everybody would have forgotten those other stories. So.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, this book just feels like a movie waiting to happen. Wow. I just could see all these scenes. I know everybody says that about, some really good books. I've been told that about some of my stuff, blah, blah, blah. But this one is a different level, Mario. It's just cinematic.
Well, how can you not write about the West and not be cinematic?
I guess.
Big sweeps, right? And beef, it's what's for dinner. Remember that?
Yeah. Well, I guess part of it is we have these images in our head thanks to Hollywood.
Right.
And so we can just sort of insert your story into the scenery we've got, the backdrop in our head, which all of the movies over time have helped us fill that in. So that helps, but the story and the plot is also quite unique. And I won't go into any more details or do any spoilers, but it's a very unique story, which would be very entertaining.
No, thank you. Thank you.
So I'm just, all the Hollywood producers that listen to the Rocky Mountain Writer podcast, we want them to know that this is available as a potential.
Well, thank you. And that. So I'm just going to have to go on a side and share a story that you shared. I was on a panel last week. We were talking about how technology has changed in writing and things. And I shared your story when you were a new writer. I think you were in Hollywood and you were working for the Christian Science Monitor.
Yep.
And the story when you were after work, you were walking along the hill.
Yep.
At the end of the day, and you could hear all the typewriters coming through, people typing on their screenplays, click, 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 and all the sound, because a lot of those old buildings don't have air conditioning.
Oh, yeah.
So the windows are open and you can hear that sound. And I think you said that you sort of memorized that sound because you knew at one time it would go away.
Yeah.
And here we are, right? Yeah. We'll never hear that sound again of people slaving away at typewriters after work, working on their screenplays, because all that's gone. Everybody just sort of ticking softly on their laptops.
It was 1978. I used to occasionally take the bus from downtown Los Angeles after work, and I was renting a very, very small room in the Hollywood Hills, and I walk up the hill, and it was like after dinner, and you could just hear these typewriters. And then I had just moved to LA. I'd only been there a few months, but the more you got into the community in the world, you realized really 1 out of every 2 people you ran into was writing a screenplay. And you wondered, how did this even happen or work or anything? It didn't make any sense. I was 24 years old, but good Lord. I mean, the sheer volume and the dedication and the hope. There was so much hope. Everybody wanted to write a movie. It was amazing.
Yeah. When I first got my first writing contract with HarperCollins, and I was working on my second book, I actually went to Los Angeles because it's set in Los Angeles. And I was, some friends of my sister were letting me stay at their place in West Hollywood. And one of the women there said, "Oh, you're a writer. There's this cafe down the street that is for the writers hangout. You might meet somebody." So I was excited. I don't know anybody. So I go over there, and it's just these tables. It's a coffee shop, and there's just these tables set up. But everybody's plugged in, listening to their podcast or listening to their playlists and working on their laptops. Nobody's interacting with one another. No. And everybody's very focused. And I learned, do not disturb these people.
No.
Because one of the things that in Los Angeles is that people are very vigilant about guarding their time.
Yeah.
Because you can spend, you could just a half-hour trip across town can all of a sudden turn into a 2-hour delay. And so and then the people are working their day jobs. So then they're going to this cafe to work on their screenplays. So their time, I mean, they're focused on that. So I waited, and then there was a part kind of interesting in the cafe where people would actually take a break from writing and they just kind of hang out there. So I go in there and introduce myself, and they're looking at me and they're like, "Well, what are you working on?" I tell them I'm working on a book, and they're looking at me like, "Book? What is this book thing?" So there was kind of the disconnect. They're working on screenplays and I'm working on a book, and that. So, but it was a very interesting experience, and I can understand that. A lot of people just don't know that it is just how big it's an industry, right?
Yeah.
The movie industry, and when we mean movie industry, I mean it's gigantic. Like a budget for a movie today is, you think about it, is the budget for a major public works.
Yeah.
$100 million.
Yeah.
I mean, that's bridges and highways.
Yeah.
And that's just one movie. It's amazing how much money they spend on that. And a lot of people working on screenplays, and I've had several people approach me to kind of be a script doctor on their screenplay since then.
Wow. Well, what was it like? I mean, you obviously enjoyed writing a Western. You've written a speculative fiction. You've written young adult. I should have had the whole list handy. You've now dabbled in how many different genres? With quite some success. I mean, what else? What am I missing? I know you've got some other stuff out there.
Well, those World War II stories. My own. It's now called. Well, it was called urban fantasy at the time. I don't know what they call it now. Science stories. My University of Doom young adult story. Lately, for short stories, I've been writing a lot of horror, which I enjoy. It's kind of, horror is like the flip side of comedy. I've heard people say that, and then once you start doing that, you realize that it's got the same kind of beats and the same kind of, you have to develop that technique of getting inside people's heads in order to make it work. So to get somebody to laugh on something, particularly something unexpected, right? You kind of penetrated their filter.
Yeah.
They got them to laugh. Well, in order for horror to work, you got to penetrate that filter to kind of make them recoil on that. So it's a challenge I enjoy working on horror more than I thought I would like.
Yeah. Quite a few short stories have been published through the Hex Publishers.
Right.
Folks with Josh Viola and all those folks.
Yes, I had 2 published with them last year. I
edited a volume or 2.
Right. I edited Blood and Gasoline. And I edited something for Rocky Mountain Fiction Writers, an anthology for them as well. So I got a little bit of editing experience.
Yeah.
Hopefully, as of right now, hopefully I'll have 3 more short stories. 1 more from Hex, and then 2 from other publishers. So I don't want to. I kind of be superstitious about that about writing, because I don't want to talk about it until it's happened.
Right. Well, any more Westerns, do you think? Do you want to dive back in at some point?
I don't have that story right now on me.
Yeah.
I've got some other things in my head right now that I want to work through.
Yeah.
I'd like to write. I haven't written a crime novel. I really want to write a crime novel, but I'm still kind of working on that story. Writing a crime novel and not having it, be the story everybody else has read already.
Yeah. Well, I have to ask you about a couple other things. One is how long is Cats in Quarantine going to keep going?
Oh, actually, I have committed myself to an end date. When I start, it's the Cats in Quarantine is a little cartoon that I started, and it was. The genesis for it was an article in the Wall Street Journal when the pandemic started, and the article had to do with how people were coping artistically with the pandemic, being locked up and all that. And I don't know how, and I started thinking about that, and I think there was a woman who did like book covers that were kind of mishmash between like The Little Engine That Could in a pandemic situation or stuff. So I thought it was kind of clever. But she had invested a lot of time coming up with these book covers, more time than I wanted to spend, like maybe 20 minutes a day doing a cartoon. And I've actually done some cartooning before, a long time ago. And I thought, okay, I'll do this cartoon about cats in quarantine. And honestly, I started in April and I thought I'd be done by June.
Yeah.
And
Year,
it just, yeah. So it's, I passed the year mark.
Yeah. I don't know if this is going to work for our video, folks. Probably not. If I can get the light right.
Oh, yeah. I can kind of see it. The Zoot Suit cats.
Yeah, that's today. And so people need to go to Instagram and follow Real Adelante Arts, if I said that right.
Yeah, Real Adelante Arts.
Yeah, Real_Adelante Arts. And it just goes back and back. And it's a great little thing every day. I can't.
Yeah, thank you. Oh, yeah. That was my Cinco de Mayo cat.
So, yeah, the video doesn't really work off Instagram, but that's what Instagram is for. So that's great. Yeah.
Well, thank you.
And how's the rest? The other question I have before our big finale question is, how's the rest of your art going?
Again, I need to thank you for poking me. There's some ideas for paintings I need to do. I think I might go in a different direction now than what I had previously done. But I'll wait until I do those paintings. It's like anything else. You got to get off your ass and do them, so I just have to go. I've got the boards prepped, the canvases. I went and inventoried off all my paint and brushes. And the only thing I haven't done is sit down in front of the easel and start painting them.
Yeah. No shows coming up though.
No, I mean, because of the pandemic. And there are some people who've had some shows on, on online Zoom and, like everything else. But the local places around here haven't really done anything like that.
Yeah. I'm going to my first art opening Friday night. In person gallery in Durango. So yeah,
okay, great,
it's starting to come back a little bit. I'm really excited to go to a actual gallery exhibit. And I don't know if you've gone out much to restaurants and stuff, but it's amazing. You go out and just people are just so happy to go. And this last weekend in my neighborhood here, there's just these parties of people, and everybody's just getting together with no masks, just having barbecues, and at the local park, just families and things getting together. And it just it used to be so normal. Now it seems so novel. Yeah, exactly. Well, Mario, this has been fantastic. As we wrap up, as always, I love having our guests promote other writers and folks whoever you might be reading, or you want to just pass along a name of somebody you really admire. Love to hear it. Well, there's two. One of is Jim Nesbit, who's a writer from West Texas, who writes kind of very noir stories, modern Western stories, where people ride old cars instead of Cadillac, instead of horses and stuff. But it's the same kind of feeling. I met him last week at an online conference, and I really it's one of his books I just started, and I really like his style. So he's one. The other one is that it's off of there's a Netflix special series called Babylon Berlin. Oh yeah. And I bought, it's based on a novel, actually a series of novels, and I bought the first one. It's by Volker Kutscher. It's in English. And what's very interesting, it's the classic 1920s noir detective story. But what makes it interesting is it's set in Germany right in the late 20s. So it's very much a slice of life. And the book is very thick, generally thicker than most similar stories, because it's almost like we talk about a fantasy novel where there's so much world building that he's telling you about what's going on in that time. It is very much a police procedural, but it's the German law police procedural. And being a detective noir stories, even the good guys are very shady, and there's just so much undercurrent going on in the story. And then of course you as the reader knows
eventually which way it's going to go.
Right. Right.
But when this story was written, there was a fear that communists were going to take over Germany. And they were very close to doing it. So there's all kinds of riots in the street and political play and all kind of this political undercurrent in the conversations and the investigations that they have. And then the politicals using the police to, you know, to push their own agendas and that. So I very much enjoy the book. He's a very good writer too. I think whoever translated it did a great job.
That's great. I started the series on Netflix and it was dubbed. And that was hard to watch, but now I know there's some sort of setting you can go on and just get the subtitled version. I need to start over because it does start really, really well.
Well, exactly. I did not like the dub version either, so the subtitles are actually better translations than the dubbing. The dubbing is very awkward English.
Yeah.
It just don't catch the flavor. But what I love about that movie or that series is the level of detail and the way they just pull you in, and that weird elevator they have in the building that you just kind of step. It's like a conveyor belt elevator. It just so, and then they have 3x5 cars, right? And that's how they track things, old school, before computers and people typing and drinking and all the craziness that was going on in Berlin at the time.
Yeah. It reminded me a little of Brazil, that movie.
Very much.
Yep. Well, hopefully we'll see you in October, if not before, at the Gold Conference. Maybe. I hope you're planning on going, but we'll see.
Okay.
Yeah. And Mario, thank you so much for your time today, and congratulations on Luther, and best of luck finding readers for that, because I can't imagine anybody not enjoying that book.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it. And I appreciate the time, and I appreciate you reaching out to me. Hopefully next time we do something like this, we can pull Tomas in and have him share his stories.
Great. Thanks, Mario.
Okay. You take care.